been through it, obviously. Going through it even once is a huge thing. And that, Amy was there and she can tell you what the MNA, the Montana Nonprofit Association panel was like. I was up there with three very experienced people, really just maybe talking mostly nonsense, but I had just been through this. And so I think if for no other reason than putting somebody up there that I think people can relate to, like, wow, if just your typical board member for one of these small Montana nonprofits can go through this and go through it successfully, then I think it would give everybody confidence that they can also do it. I do have some slides here really just to keep me on track, and I'm going to try to make this as brief as possible. I know I definitely want to hear from the other MWCC board members and former board members that were around during this. And I think, Heather, you might have to leave a little bit early. So I want to make sure that you've got plenty of time. So I'll go into what I've got prepared here. And like I said, just to keep me on track and to run through our process really quick, our previous executive director, he let us know really months and months ahead of time that he was looking for a new job. He gave us kind of a soft leave date that he thought, I will be gone by this quarter of the upcoming year kind of deal. And that was huge. I can't say that we took as much advantage of that as we should have when he finally gave us the notice that he had taken a job. And I don't remember exactly what he gave us. Someone else might remember. It was at least a month. I think it might have been 2. And that's when we really started to scramble. And so we immediately got members from anyone willing, from the executive committee, the governance committee, which tend to be your more involved board members anyways, and then some others. We all met. Luckily, in person at first, a few of us, to really line out, what needs to happen. And that's something that the Montana Nonprofit Association, that their document goes into, and that we'll touch on again, is really if you get people that want to dive into this involved, and you do it intentionally and you do it thoughtfully, you really can't go wrong. There's people out there that have been through this before. There's resources that are out there. The Montana Nonprofit Toolkit is one of them. But if you do this intentionally, you're going to come out of it okay, I think is what we learned. So we really dove really quickly into what needed to happen. It was the timeline. When is our current executive director leaving? How do we hire? Is the position description updated? What do we need from our outgoing executive director? Because I think most of you, if you're on the board, you don't know day in, day out what your executive director does. And so getting that from them before they go, that is really huge. And really we got into, it's amazing how fast you get into the weeds on hiring. People have a lot of assumptions about how the hiring process should go, how the interview process should go, what are the requirements for jobs like these, what level of education, and all that stuff starts to come out. And you realize, especially with a board like ours, you have nonprofit people, you have state government employees, and there are very different assumptions of what some of these things should look like based on individuals' background. And so we needed to figure all of that out. And then really getting ahead of the messaging. That if your executive director's leaving and you have staff, they just might have gotten thrown a little bit into turmoil. And so really a lot of contact with staff, making sure that you're all on the same page, and that if anybody is talking to people outside of the group, that they're sharing a consistent message, that they're showing that you've got it on, we have it under control. You don't need to worry about the organization in the meantime. We know what we're doing. And then all of this also, I'm not going to say we did the best job on it. But this is just what we thought about, and what the advice that I've got for you. It doesn't always mean that I took that advice perfectly well, but it is our advice. So how do I move forward a slide when I'm on sharing screen here?
I think mine usually just click on it, like literally click on your slide, but
Yep. Now, do I go
Now I
back?
don't know how you go back. Maybe just your arrow, maybe your arrow keys.
Well, anyway, that last slide was just a screenshot of the cover of the transition toolkit from the Nonprofit Association. And then here's the link, which Terry dropped in the chat. So that's fine. Like she said, $45. You know, with the work that MNA put into this, I see that they did get a grant through, I wish I could remember the name. It's one of the bank, maybe First Interstate. I can't remember the name of the bank. They got a grant through a bank to be able to offer this to their members for free. But really, knowing how much work they put into this, I would even say $45 is nothing for this document. If you've got that in your organization, buy this thing because it's worth $45. It's really great. This is just a quick screenshot that I took out of the toolkit, and it is broken into a few different stages: the preparation, the actual search, and the biggest one that I think a lot of people don't dig into, and we even currently need to do a better job of this, is okay, now you've hired an executive director. How do you make sure they're successful? How do you celebrate that you've gone through this process? And now, you're moving on to the new executive director, and people did a lot of work. So don't forget to take some time to congratulate yourselves, and then they've got it as Thrive. But one thing, like I mentioned, that you'll notice in this a lot, in this bottom text, the last sentence: a thoughtful planning process allows the people. Anyways, it really is the intentionality and the thoughtfulness is a big thing, and just really having this. I know somebody in their registration, they mentioned checklists and things like this, and I mentioned this at the Montana Nonprofit conference, was that you can modify checklists. None of them are going to be perfectly suited to your organization, but not having to start from scratch, having to come up with a checklist, is, you don't know what you don't know. And so it's pretty tough having to fabricate it out of thin air. But if you can use this toolkit and checklists that they have in here, you can also find stuff online. And then you've got a checklist to work on. You can modify it as you need. You can take things off of it. You can add things to it. But just having that template. And this document has a ton of templates. There's a whole kind of bonus package appendix attached to this that is a whole bunch of templates that you can run through. Even the check-in schedule and things to check in on with the new executive director after you hire them at the 1 month stage, 3 month stage, 6 months. So it's really thorough, worth getting.
Zach,
So
just a quick question in the chat that's related to what you just talked about. Shane was asking if the transition document is targeted for nonprofit leadership, which I know it is. I mean, it's the Montana Nonprofit Association. But he was asking, can this be applied to other private industry or government leadership transitions?
Yes and yes. It is definitely geared towards nonprofits. And I think if you have intentional people that are willing to do more than the minimum in your organization, whether that's state or private, this absolutely translates. So I looking at the time, we can always go back through this, but I want to make sure that our other board members and staff members have a chance to speak up on this. These slides will be available, but just really quick, the being thoughtful, this really is, and the toolkit goes into this a ton. It really is an opportunity. This is an opportunity that, as much as you can, to take a pause and really assess the organization. It's kind of that going back to why, why do we exist? Is that still legitimate in today's climate? Why do the board members serve? Why are the staff here? It's really a great time to stop and take stock of all that, because we often don't. We bury our noses in these things and in our daily work, and it just goes on autopilot in some sense. And so taking this as an opportunity to really do a self-assessment of the organization, it's a huge opportunity to do that. Just the last one. Yeah, this is wordy, but again, it's the same stuff that I just talked about. And really, I cannot stress the benefit of that MNA toolkit enough. It is, you don't even need to listen to anything that I'm saying except get that toolkit. It's big. It might be somewhere between 20 and 40 pages, but you don't need to read the whole thing. Even if you just use the templates and the checklists, that will put you light years ahead of if you just tried to go about this without any of that. So I will stop and let our other, I think, let's, if any of the board members that were involved in this want to go through, and then I also really want to hear from Terry and Kiera because they were running the show for quite a while without an executive director. And then for a little bit there too, Terry's sabbatical was thrown into this whole thing. So during the time we had no executive director, that was also during the time that Terry was on her sabbatical. And so at that point, it was the board and mostly Kiera running the show. And so definitely want to hear from them.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Zach. Heather, yeah, go ahead, Heather. I was just going to say, because I know you have to leave early. Go ahead.
That was a great overview. Just one of the things that you said at the end that I just want to expand upon is when we were really having a conversation about who we are, why do we exist, and do we need a different kind of leader? It was really around what roles and functions do we need for an executive director based on where the organization is at this time and based on the other skills that we have in our team members. So just wanted to provide that clarification. That was a really helpful exercise to go through.
Other board members or staff want to chime in?
I guess I can go since no one else is. Just a couple thoughts I had while Zach was talking. I think we can always look back and say we could have done things better. I think that's just the nature of life in general. But I did just want to note that I think throughout this process, no matter where it is or who is doing it, it'll be chaotic and things will come at you from all different directions that you didn't expect. And I think that's just how it is. It's just a messy time in any organization. And so I think at least recognizing that and letting go of that as much as you can is probably helpful for your sanity. I think one of the things that was really helpful for us that Zach mentioned was having someone in place, having the executive director in place to really record what he was doing on a daily basis and what needed to get done was huge for us. And I don't know that that happens in every situation. I know there's probably lots of situations where people just leave and give 2 weeks and that's it. So I think even more than kind of this transition planning, it's just kind of something to think about from an organizational standpoint in general, that it's good to know what people are doing. And maybe that means having good meeting notes, having everyone's passwords in a place that are accessible to be able to do, having standard operating procedures for things, having good records, I think is probably a good thing for organizations to have in general. And then, succession planning. And so if someone does leave, you have access to that. Our executive director set up a OneNote, I think it was OneNote, yeah, that none of us knew how to use, but it was really easy to share once we figured it out, and everything was there and you could click on the different tabs to see what was going on. And so as much as I would say there were things that we could do better, that was a really amazing resource. And I can't even imagine what it would have been like if we didn't have access to a lot of those notes. So the other thing I was just thinking is that always expect things to take longer than you think. That was the case for us when we thought we could get through interviews and hiring someone in a short order, and it definitely took 2 or 3 times longer than that. So something to think about anyway.
Yeah, that just to expand on what Michelle brought up, because I definitely wanted to hit on that again. Not everybody has the ability to get this out of their outgoing executive, or, depending on your organization, however your organization is structured, whatever that position is. But we legitimately took a list of what needs to happen on a daily basis, what needs to happen on a weekly basis. What is going to get the ball dropped that is going to look really bad? What can get pushed off until the new ED gets hired? But once our outgoing executive director left, we're like, okay, we got to check the mail once a week. We got to make deposits once a week. We have to do this. We have to do this. We just knew it wasn't some mystery, like, what are we forgetting? And then Amy may mention this, but I think when she came on, that was a huge resource for her too, to know what needed to happen day to day, week basis. So that was really helpful.
Well, I think we're at a point where we could open it up for questions, in addition to if MWCC people want to continue to chime in. I know we haven't heard from Amy, or especially from Kira, or Tracy was there a little bit as well. So feel like continue to chime in, but if people want to ask questions, you're welcome to do that now as well.
Hello, my name is Jan Swanson, and I'm sorry I came in late. I'm in Australia, and it's a different time zone here. But I'm also president of the Flathead Lakers, and we're a small organization. Thank you for the invitation. I received it from Amber, one of our staff members, and we're currently right in the process of hiring a new ED. We had about a month's notice. We are using a recruiter, but more to the point, my question is, how did the board make sure that there was a clear lane as far as what they were doing versus what the staff was doing, so there wasn't conflict there?
I'm interested to hear what Terry and Kiera think. Some of this comes down to really what is legitimately the board responsibility and what is staff responsibility. You don't want to cross that line too much, but then just what made sense. There were a lot of things that were just logistical. Our mailbox is in Helena, and once our ED left, we had no other staff in Helena. So our bank is in Helena, our mailbox is in Helena, therefore checking mail, depositing checks became a board member thing, because we have board members in Helena. So there were little things like that. If anyone else, the staff probably has a more obvious idea of this than I do. Some of it's faded from my memory already, but I think once we had that list of daily, weekly, monthly tasks, we just sort of chunked that out into what made sense for board versus staff.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, Zach. We literally, in that OneNote document, put initials. I think it was like a color coding system, but it was like, here's who's doing all these things. And yeah, we did have an interesting situation, because I'm in Missoula, Kira's in Kentucky, and our ED was the only person who was in Helena. So yeah, some of those physical tasks did fall on board members. I'm trying to think. I mean, yeah, it was pretty organic. I don't remember, of course, that like I took on some of the financial tracking and things, but then I left on my sabbatical, which happened to overlap with this. And then most of it just fell on Kira and the board. Kira, did you want to speak to any of this?
Yeah, I can a little bit. I will second what Terry said, and that it was kind of organic, of just taking on what made sense, not only with location, but already our job descriptions. And it was decided before Ethan left. If I remember correctly, Ethan did a lot of the like, okay, Kira, you should do this. Do you feel comfortable? Do you have questions? Terry should be doing this. Terry, do you have questions before I leave? And then once Terry left, Terry did the same thing. She's like, here's all the things that I expect to happen. Here's how you can do them. If you have questions, you can reach out to this board member. So I'll just second also what Michelle said. The succession planning is key. As much as you can do, just trying to prepare for that to happen, because that I would not have made it through. I'm only part-time and I don't even live in Montana. Without those notes and that help from the people who weren't there, like it would have been a major struggle.
So I'll add a couple things that I am thinking about that may or may not help with this question, but there were two places where I think it was a little bit interesting between staff and board. One being time cards. So without the executive director in place, you know, we had to try to figure out how to have, you know, staff get paid and make sure that they weren't approving their own time. And so that required some, you know, conversations and trying to figure out how to handle that. And then the other thing was just in the hiring process itself, because the board is responsible for hiring the ED position and the staff isn't. But at the same time, you want the staff to be in the know about what's going on with hiring. And so I feel like for a while, the board was trying to move forward with all this hiring, but we were also trying to be mindful, and we were successful at this sometimes and not, of making sure Kiera knew where we were with what was happening and making sure she felt like, you know, she knew as much as she could.
Thank you.
And we may get into the actual hiring process more, and hopefully Tracy will have some input on that too. That's a whole other deal. I had a thought about that as somebody was talking and I lost it. But yeah, keeping the communication open is huge. I think we probably thought we were keeping staff more informed than we actually were. But I think especially on Kiera's side, being so detached from the Montana scene, and then once Terry was gone, it's just like, well, I kind of want to know something about where you're at with hiring my new boss. It can be a stressful time. And that's, you know, everyone has a different kind of board. And we've been really lucky with this, where there are no power struggles. There are no overly strong personalities that try to grab the reins and run with things. Everybody just wants to make sure that things happen right. And so I think, you know, your board and your staff better than we do. We got away with a lot because we don't have any of those types. And so we didn't have to have a lot of structure in place saying, no, you can't do this. It's not your place. No, this is this person's place, because nobody wanted to step on anyone's toes, but not everyone's in that position.
Thank you.
Do we have other questions?
I don't have a question, but I'll just chime in on our OneNote document really quickly, because it was and continues to be our housing for just about every project we work on now. And what I've found, you know, it doesn't have every single detail, but it also made a great structure for me to fill in really small details, to knowing that, wow, now MWCC, we built this like almost our own internal transition document. So if I continue to use it as I implement work, then it actually is like the even almost like the operations level document of, so what does it mean to run payroll, which I think is a great example of a place that's like, oh yeah, that actually has lots of checks and balances and matters for billable rates, and how does your accountant deal with it and all that stuff. It's nice to have the framework of the OneNote to go in and be like, this literally means click on this button in QuickBooks and then go to this button and do this. And that's just like a detail, of course, you know. And I think, because the comment, Shane, your question about what groups the documents for is like helping think through that level of detail that a person needs to learn is good for any group, but it has really served as a good operations. And even if you're just doing, you know, in our field, especially, a lot of our backgrounds aren't necessarily administrative. So especially with administrative tasks, having those pieces especially strong makes it so a board member and the new person can really step in. Or to the point, the staff really did help a lot with tracking finances. And so allowing that to them to step in that way. And Jan, of course, there could be different levels of comfort, but I have a personally think that like as open as you can be with staff and the Board of Finances makes sense. But
And one thing that this reminded me a little bit more of my sabbatical, because as I did research on the benefits of sabbaticals, I mean, I have to say, I think two of the biggest benefits that I saw to MWCC going through this was one, and I'll see if people agree with me or not, but I think certainly Kira and I learned a lot more about the way this organization really works, to the finances, grants that I had had nothing to do with, and suddenly was like, okay, now I'm managing this grant. And how was Ethan reporting on this, and how, and just getting a better picture of the way things work. And I think that's, you know, can be an advantage anytime somebody steps away, whether it's for parental leave or a sabbatical, or whether they're actually leaving the organization. I think it just allows people to be a little more invested in the way, yeah, in everything, and to know more about it. And I think, and board members would have to speak to that, but I feel like that's what I heard from on the board end too, is that, I mean, I remember before the transition, there were these ongoing, I mean, since I've been at MWCC, how do we get board members more engaged? How do we get board members more engaged? And just more like board members knowing where to plug in, like, where do you need me? And suddenly it was like everybody knew, oh, you need me. And I just feel like our board did just an amazing, I mean, I remember feeling like guilty. Oh my God, you guys are doing so much and you're volunteers, you know, but our board really stepped up, and I think that was positive too.
Can you tell me how many board members and how many staff members make up your organization?
Yeah, we've got 2 full-time staff, 1 part-time staff. Kira's our part-time person. And then we have 12 board members, right, guys? I think we have a minimum of 10, but we usually have around 12, and I think that's what we had during the transition. Yeah, so pretty small, relatively.
Yeah.
And I'll say I was only 10 hours. And then when Ethan decided he was leaving, they were like, would you like to pick up more time? Would you come like halftime?
Mhm.
And I was luckily able to do that. So
And one other last thing I'll say before I open it up to whoever else wants to speak next is that the thing that was really helpful to us too, and it's the MWCC network, right? And hopefully we're all plugged into that on this call, but we were able to, like, for example, we have a grant with DEQ 319 that's for the Big Sky Watershed Core program. And there were things going on with that while I was away. And I was able to talk with Megan Gilmore, who's our contract manager who works for DEQ, and say, okay, can I tell the Big Sky Watershed Core members to reach out to you while I'm gone? And I feel like we didn't do that a ton, but we just have a lot of really, really supportive partners outside of internal MWCC. And we were able to talk to them and be like, hey, this is happening. Kira is going to be the only one here. Can you help us out? And I don't think anybody said no. So.
Oh, great. Yeah. Good to know. Thank you.
What else? Other questions? Other thoughts?
I'll just add one quick thought, because it is really nice to hear about, I don't know what it's called, the inadvertent learning, I like to call it that, because you did a task for a little while and then now you know about it. And it's also for our staff now, I feel like it's nice to have people that know about how operations are, right? And of course, when it comes to succession or anything like that, like, internal strengths are really invaluable, I think, versus bringing new people in. And I have a lot of strong feelings about institutional knowledge and nonprofits. So, I mean, the more you can build in internally too, the better people can answer questions.
Yeah.